We're at a funny point in the season where Arsenal play before Liverpool this weekend, and if Arsenal beat Brighton, they'll be within 3 points, even though the title race is over. But thankfully, you've got two people here who don't think the title race is over. Arsenal take on Brighton. No Saka. Let's start here because I think this kid deserves his praises. Nwaneri, unbelievable against Brentford, apparently. I was obviously in the States, so didn't watch the full 90 minutes, but I heard... I mean, in all fairness, let's just pause here. When Arsenal have a player that's good, why is he already the best player in the world?
It's just because Arsenal have a very loud and prominent online presence, I would say.
I see.
And so the hype feels like it's a bit more than maybe you'd get at other clubs. But he is an unbelievable talent. I think during the time that Martin Odegaard was out, there were a lot of calls for him to start more games. I think actually Arteta did quite well in resisting that because he's a 17-year-old and you need to keep his feet on the ground, but also manage sort of the perception of him. And had he come into the side, not really cut it, which was very possible, even for a talent like that at 17, then there would have been a negativity around him that I just don't think would have helped. When Mikel Arteta discussed the Bukayo Saka injury, the fact that he needed to have surgery and all the rest of it, he mentioned Ethan Nwaneri as one of the options on the right-hand side. And I know a lot of Arsenal fans heard that and went, oh, come on, Mikel. Like, you're just trying to sort of make it seem like we don't need to go into the January market. But he was true to his word because he gave Ethan Nwaneri a start away at Brentford in that position. There was a bit of a story behind that as well. Obviously, Nwaneri made his Premier League debut at Brentford a couple of seasons ago. And I thought he did a really competent job. I don't think he was outstanding, but I think he did a really good job and gave Mikel Arteta something to think about. He was able to interchange positions quite a bit with Gabriel Jesus as well. And I thought that worked really well. And it was the first time we saw Nwaneri and Odegaard in the same 11, which a lot of people have been calling for as well.
Yeah, I think the reason people were calling for him to come in for Odegaard is because of that creative spark that he's got. I've watched quite a bit of him in terms of like the highlights and the compilations that people pull up. And one thing that's really fascinating about him is we say this a lot about young players, but when you see a kid who is of that age and he can create separation between himself and someone marking him, that's a scary thing that you just either have or you don't.
Yeah.
It's a completely different dynamic to Saka now, obviously, because I don't think he's a right winger, in my opinion, from what I've seen. But it does then, as you mentioned, allow Jesus to drift into wide areas. And you seem to have stumbled across that Jesus being in good form, which has happened very randomly because we've sort of waited for a while. But I think the last time we spoke, did you say you spoke to him and he said this is the freshest he's felt in a while?
Yeah, exactly that. I spoke to him after the Crystal Palace game in the Cup and I asked him, I said to him, technically you were brilliant tonight. The finishes were there, the passes were there, the skills, the tricks were there. But physically, how are you? Because injuries have been a problem for him of late. And he said, this is the best I've felt in a long time. And it feels to me now like he's able to flip between being the Jesus that drifts and gets involved in the game, but he's also got that sharpness and fitness now to get into the goal-scoring positions as well. And it felt like for a long time with Jesus, he'd either hang around at centre-forward because that was what was asked of him and be on the peripheries of a game, or he'd go drifting and never be there when you needed that man to come alive inside the penalty box. There's a bit of both now, and that's 6 goals in 4 games now for Gabriel Jesus. So having him back is massive, and it shows that Arsenal do have a squad. The squad's going to be really, really important because without Kai Havertz, it's all on Jesus at that centre-forward position, and he's back in form, thankfully.
And obviously, no Saka means you need goal contributions from various different players.
Yeah.
You have got a potential problem. One in form. We'll talk about Odegaard in a second. But at right back, Timber's suspended for this one. Rice missed the Brentford game. Apparently, illness. We're not too sure. Is this just going to be one where Partey shifts into right back, Rice comes into midfield? The worry there for me would be if one of them two now get injured in this game, then you've got a slightly bigger problem.
Yeah, I mean, Rice came off the bench late against Brentford, but he clearly wasn't fit enough to start for whatever reason, whether it was a hangover from an injury that he's had recently or if it was to do with that sickness bug that we heard was ripping through the Arsenal camp, like over the
ripping through
the
sob story of Arsenal.
They were going down like flies from what we're hearing. But yeah, Timber suspended is a problem, and it's a big problem because there's no Ben White still. Takahiro Tomiyasu, as I said to you off air, is nowhere to be seen. We don't know how long he's going to be out for. Nobody's ever given any indication on that.
So bizarre.
It just suggests that it's something serious, doesn't it? And it's really frustrating because he got an improved contract just before this latest bout of injury problems. So without him, and Arsenal have midfielders that can sort of cover on the left-hand side. People like Miles Lewis-Skelly, Zinchenko can do that role as well. But on the right, they're a bit short. Partey played right back a few times this season. I thought he did a good job against Liverpool at home in that position. Away at Brighton, it's not ideal, but it's needs must. And I think Rice will probably come back into the midfield and that'll work itself out.
All right, we will talk about Brighton. Don't worry, Brighton fans. We're going to get to you because I found out a stat right before we started recording, which is unbelievable. But we've got Odegaard out of form, which is interesting because obviously he was out for a while, and because he was out, Arsenal fans said our form hasn't been great. He's come back in. I think he had a couple of games where he looked pretty good, but now we're seeing a dip in form again. Some Arsenal fans were saying, let's take him out of the side. Don't think you have that luxury, to be honest. Where are you with Odegaard? And what's actually not working here?
I think everybody knows that Arsenal want to work everything through Martin Odegaard. And so he gets special attention, as all top players do. And sometimes it takes top players a little bit of time to figure out what tweak they need to make in order to be able to be really impactful again. You know the space that he wants to drift into, that half space on the right-hand side. And he just gets a lot of attention right now. When he first came back, instant impact, everybody could see it. And it's just declined a little bit. He's just become a father. I don't want to use that as an excuse, but like we've both been there. It's a big life-changing event.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just caught up with him a little bit. I have no concerns about Martin Odegaard. I'm certain that he'll be back on track very soon. But what he brings by being in the side, even if he's not at his brilliant best, is that leadership. And I know when he was named captain of the club, people went, well, he's not the kind of guy that you want to give the captaincy to. Actually, his leadership's impeccable. He chases every ball. He triggers the press. He's always pointing. He's always putting people in their places in terms of the tactical setup. Arsenal scored against Brentford, and rather than celebrating with the rest of the team, he ran over to Mikel Arteta because there was something that he'd spotted, and the two were having a discussion about it, something tactical. So he's Arteta's eyes on the pitch, and I think that's a big part of his importance, as well as what he brings on the ball as well.
I think the game's changed so much that there was a time where Cesc Fabregas became captain of Arsenal. People said, I can't believe it, but that was because of his actions and the sort of player he was. I think the days are now gone from like a Roy Keane type captain. And I think Odegaard's understanding of the game is why he's the captain.
Yeah,
There's so many
100%.
situations. I think sometimes I sit and watch Arsenal and go, they just keep firing the ball into Odegaard and he just keeps popping it off to other areas. And I think that's because he understands what's happening in the next 3 phases along, whereas other players don't really.
Well, if you ping the ball into him and he knows that he's got 3 players coming to close him down, he knows that he's attracting those players. So he might not be the one that plays the next pass or has the shot at goal, but he's taking 3 players out of the game if he can just make sure that he gets the ball from A to B while attracting people in.
I think he's one of those players that I think there's so much talk about his form's off, but all I kept seeing was stats. And I think he's one of these players, and he reminds me maybe a little bit of David Silva, where sometimes like the stats are very misleading. You just have to watch him. And now I do think he has been sloppy in possession, and I do think he hasn't played as well as he can. But I think if you take him out the side, like some fans were asking, nobody can do the job that he does. And so you need this guy in the team. Brighton, what is happening here? They haven't won a game since November the 23rd, where they beat Bournemouth. Their current form is, to be honest, quite poor. The 2-2 draw against Leicester, where they folded. They lost 3-1 to Palace, 1-1 against West Ham, 0-0 against Brentford, and 2-2 against Villa. Where are you with this team?
Well, if you're a Brighton fan and you're looking for an omen, they haven't lost their first league game in any of the last 8 calendar years since a 1-0 home loss to Wolves on New Year's Day back in 2016 in the Championship. So maybe their fortunes are going to turn around this weekend. But where am I on Brighton? It's really difficult to say because there's weeks where I watch them and I'm blown away by how expansive they are, how exciting they are, how energetic they are. And there's weeks where I think it's not working. Have you got something else in your locker? And it feels to me that under Fabian Hürzeler, they don't. So I'm a little bit torn on Brighton. I guess I'll throw a question back at you. What constitutes a good season for Brighton? Because they've set the bar so high in recent years relative to the size of the football club that now I almost feel like we expect too much of Brighton going into every year.
I would say I agree with that, to be fair. I think they've become this team that like everyone wants to watch, everyone likes watching, I think if you're a neutral and you're watching Brighton against Villa, you're going to back Brighton to win the game because that's just how you feel towards them. I just think when I look at this 11, maybe 12 months ago, they probably had 3 or 4 players where you go, I'd take him. Now I look at this and I go, there's João Pedro and no one else. And the rest of this team are like, Carlos Baleba had a couple of good games. People are going, he's a £50 million midfielder because we're so used to like Brighton having these players everywhere. I don't think they have that right now. And so therefore I think that is quite reflective of where they're at in the league and what's happening with this team. I think a top 8 finish is a good season for them. But then there's Bournemouth now, who are maybe like the new Brighton. There's Newcastle having this upturn in form. But then there's teams like Villa who are sort of stumbling away. But
And
then there's
Spurs and United have to fit in there somewhere.
yeah,
really,
exactly.
As well.
And then there's Forest who are still up there, who I was convinced would fall away. So I sort of look at this and I go, it's a bad season for Brighton if they don't finish in the top 10. But it's still a decent season if they finish in the top 10. I do think that the sort of constant selling of players has caught up with them. They haven't recruited as well as maybe they had in previous seasons. And then players like Matoma haven't quite been in the same sort of form that they've been in previously. And they're probably going to lose João Pedro next. So I have some worries about the longer term future of Brighton. But this is a good game for them. I think this game sort of suits their hybrid model that they're under at the moment, where they don't want to play too expansive. They'll probably try and sit off a little bit. I just don't know if they'll score any goals, which is so strange to say about Brighton, because I think we were just saying about how much people like them. I just don't think they're as so lazy, but as flary as what they maybe were 12 to 18 months ago.
They feel more functional now, don't they?
Yeah, it's
More functional.
I mean, we spoke about in a separate video with Spurs and Newcastle why like I sort of back Ange. I want to see variance in style. I think we're going to see two teams playing a somewhat similar style. One that just does it in a more rigid manner, say in Arsenal, and these guys will have a bit more flair. But I think when I look at this 11, like Julian Ciso 12 months ago should have been a player. Now that we were going, wow, he's going to turn up and do something. I'm just going, he's just another Brighton player now. Where do you see this one going?
It's a really tough one to call this. I feel like I've been down to the Amex a few times in recent seasons. A couple of times to watch Arsenal play 5:30 games under the lights. It's not, and the atmosphere has been really, really good. I also covered their game against Spurs not that long ago, where again, they were really, really good. It came from 2-0 down and turned the game on its head. So I think Brighton can cause Arsenal problems, but I think Arsenal should just have enough. So my prediction is Brighton 1, Arsenal 3.
I'm going to go Arsenal 1-0. I have a weird feeling it won't be as entertaining as what we're hoping for. So yeah, I reckon Arsenal win 1-0.